Hey there, I'm William Green. These are My Green Pets, and today's episode is going to be me and orchid judge Stephen Van Campen Lewis discussing Catasetum culture and the history and culture of Cattleya rex. So looking forward to that. I do have to apologize that the sound quality is not great. There's some pretty annoying echo in there. I will definitely have that fixed next time I do this. And also, because the video is so long, I've got it. If you look in the description below, there should be an index with timestamps, and you can click on the different timestamps, and it will take you to those different points in the video. Hopefully, just to make it a little bit easier to navigate. So, without further ado, here is today's episode. Thanks for joining us. Hey there.
Hey, how are
Howdy.
you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
How's Texas?
Hot.
Are you serious? Well,
I like
Colorado is beautiful today. It is just about 72, sunny, clear, and it's very welcome because it's been cloudy and cold for about 2 weeks, and we are not used to that here in Colorado.
Yeah, it's about 20 degrees warmer here right now.
All right, so Stephen Van Campen Lewis is an AOS. Are you a deputy judge?
I'm a probationary judge, sort of in the middle. There's three tiers. I'm the middle tier.
Middle tier, longtime Catasetum grower, fan of the genus.
Hmm?
Why do you like Catasetum so much?
I don't know. I guess they're weird and fun, and I don't have to water them for half the year, so that's super convenient.
That's great. And you're also a Cattleya fan.
Yes, that's I've been growing Cattleya since '91 or '92 as a 12-year-old kid, so it's been a while.
What's the draw with the Cattleyas?
Again, there's so many groups that are so cool, and I don't know, Cattleya is this the smell, the look.
Classic.
It's hard to say exactly what it is, but over the years, I've found that I want to specialize more and more and more because there's, I think you mentioned when in your videos there's like 30,000 species, and you know, it's you could be collecting things forever
Yeah,
with
and
and
never have
just
them all, and never
yeah,
know how to grow them all well.
yeah, exactly. So
Well, today's video, we're going to be talking to Stephen about some catasetums that I have growing, and then we're also going to talk about my collection of Cattleya rex that I've had since 2014. So let's just jump right in. So I'm going to just kind of flip through some of these. So this is the classic Cycnodes Wine Delight. And this one has actually started growing quite a bit sooner than the other ones. And I want you to look at um, the bulbs. The bulbs are pretty shrunken.
yeah,
And I was just wondering, what your thoughts were on that as far as if you can see, I'm kind of showing you here, you can see there are roots that have reached the bottom.
yeah.
Um, So if this was your plant, would you go ahead and start watering, or would you give it some more time?
I would certainly consider it strongly. You're sort of getting to that zone of bulb shrinkage where you might be getting close to cutting too deep in terms of not watering. The roots, at least that one root, looks like it's probably long enough to receive water, and the bulbs are sort of, like I said, that borderline zone where you wait much longer, you run the risk of losing the plant. Um, as well, I've got a plant here that's kind of in the same zone. I can show that as well if you want.
Sure.
But I would start watering that.
Okay.
This is a Catasetum Bella Vista's sangria. This is a plant that I chopped up and sold half of to a
Oh,
friend.
it's in bloom.
Yeah, so this is one of those ones. It's just opening, so that the colors aren't really all that strong yet, but it's nice. But it's sort of in the same position as yours. Like, this is acceptable, but once you get to this level of bulb shrinkage, um, you really want to keep an eye on it, especially if it's got a spike. I actually watered that one yesterday. I'm not sure how long the roots are, but it's in brand new sphagnum, so that dries out really quickly. So if you need sort of an emergency watering to save the plant, you can do that. You can So for both your plant and my plant, you could start watering right away, or you could water once now, maybe once next week, and see if that fattens up the bulbs a little bit, so you sort of get out of that danger zone. But
It's
you know,
not a
just one of
big deal if Catasetum shed the oldest bulb here and there, right?
no, especially not on a big plant like that.
Now this is
Um,
a different hybrid. This is a Mormodia Jumbo World. It's got three old bulbs. This is the newest growth. And this one blooms typically around December, around Christmas time.
mhm.
But its roots are a lot finer. They're not big, thick roots, but it is starting to reach the bottom as well. I don't know if you can see these guys
Yeah.
pushing out. And I'm still, because the bulbs are still pretty stalked, I'm definitely gonna wait at least until next week before I start watering this one again. You think I should wait longer or just, I mean, there are quite a few roots and but it is putting out new ones too, so I worry like if I start watering, are these new roots just gonna kind of stop
I
growing
would
or
wait. I think another week is fine. You could probably even push it another 2 weeks. I don't think you really need to go much longer than that, though. Those bulbs are kind of shriveled. If you touch them and they're kind of soft, you probably want to water them next week, like you
okay,
said. But
that's a good indicator, like if they feel kind of soft.
yeah, if they're getting real shrunk like that and they're starting to get a little soft, that means the plant's not necessarily all that happy. And again, these guys, um, I kind of wonder if some of the newer growers look at this and say, "Oh, I should shrink my bulbs. That's a goal."
Uh-huh.
Um, and that's not really a goal. It's acceptable. It's what the plants are adapted to do. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's what you want to do, right?
Okay, so it's
So
more about getting good root development than bulbs shrinking up.
yeah, so you're sort of sacrificing short-term bulb thickness to grow the roots, and like I said, that's what these plants are adapted to do. Um, if you don't allow your plant to have that short-term bulb shrinkage, you're not going to get a good root system, and you're probably not going to have a good blooming, and you might even lose your plant in a year or two. So that's really what it's about. Is like I said, it's not a goal to shrink the bulbs. It just kind of happens,
Okay.
and that's how it is.
All right, let me show you. So this one is that this is the first year that I've had two like full Catasetum hybrids, so they're not hybridized with any other genus. This is the Fong Sing, and it's actually its roots. It's got some really nice looking ones, but it's also got some that looks like they just kind of stopped in the medium. And I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, it's tough to tell it. I'll have to take your word that it stopped and didn't just simply bend back into because you see some nice green roots up
Yeah, these
there.
look nice, but some of the other
Yeah.
ones look just kind of like the ends have just turned white. But you're right, I don't know for sure that they're not still growing.
I mean, is that a root going down into the bottom there?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah. So, you know, I guess if you have a root or two that sort of stops mysteriously in the media, it kind of it's a kind of a head scratcher. But if you see other ones going down and they still have green root tips, that's fine. It's when you see a bunch of your roots stop growing and stop having green root tips like that you need to be concerned. And I think, you know, I see that most often. If you start watering too early and the plant's like, oh no, I'm not gonna make more roots. Or B, if the roots are aerial and they're coming down, you know, they seem to stop growing if conditions are too dry, and they haven't hit that media yet. I'm not sure why that is, but you really want your roots to pop out and then go straight down into the media. Anytime they're kind of hanging out in the air, not every time, but a lot of the time they'll stop
they'll just
growing. And
give up.
uh, Yeah, I've always assumed that's just lack of humidity.
This dude looks good.
That looks great.
It's probably gonna get broken off, but and actually
Yeah.
this one up here is not the same as this one. This one actually turned and went back in, so this one's coming from somewhere else. This is another Catasetum. This is a new hybrid Fred Clark put out last year, I think. And so yeah,
When the roots get that long and you snap them off, they'll branch. It's really those early roots that don't branch.
oh, okay. So as long as they've got some length to them. All right.
Yeah.
Well, if there, do you have any other Catasetum comments, or shall we move on to the Cattleya? We're about 12 minutes in right now.
No, I guess I would say that it's Memorial Day weekend. It's the end of May. Uh, Most of you should have your catasetums well, sort of in an advanced stage of growth during this dry period. Hopefully, you will consider watering them in the next week or two. I've been seeing some folks online posting, typically in colder places, and they're saying, "Hey, my growth is this big, and it's not. It's growing really slowly. Why is that?" These guys they love heat and high light. If your growth is growing at a strangely a slow rate, at the end of May, crank up your heat, crank up the light, supplement in whatever way you can, and that should help. That should really help them get growing a little faster.
All right. Thank you, sir. Let's move on to discussing the illustrious and rarely grown, rarely seen Cattleya rex. I was so thrilled 5 years ago. I was browsing eBay, and believe it or not, I found um, I found this set of Cattleya rex online. Is this on your screen now? Do you see my Flickr Cattleya rex
Yeah, I see
seedling
that.
grow? So these were the
Yeah.
actual pictures of the flask that I bought on eBay. And they,
And I vaguely remember this from your orchid board thread that you started when you deflask these, and that's actually for everyone watching. That's the first time that you and I started
right,
interacting, or at least
on the good
on
old
orchid
orchid
board.
board, which I'm really
Yeah,
not on too
back in the
much
day.
anymore. Are you still on there?
Yeah, yeah, I'm still on there. I Sir 79, and I really only I'm not on there nearly as often as I was. I feel like I'm on Facebook groups are so much better now,
Yeah.
with really great growers. So I'm usually over there, but I still post over there every now and then.
So this is all the same flask, just kind of turned different ways. It was sold to me with about 25 seedlings. You know, you don't know exactly how many is going to be in there. And so, yeah, when I deflask them, I just try to count them all out. You can see how tiny some of these guys were, like a centimeter, if that, with like one little root off to the side.
Yeah.
Um, and
Do you recall by chance who was selling that?
yeah, her username was like Lisa Marie something, and if you go to eBay, she still has stuff for sale. She has a lot of species that she flasks.
Okay.
And if you have seed pods, you can send them to her, and she'll flask them up for you. I'll look it up and put the link to her eBay in the description of the video so that you can get
Yeah,
access
I'd
to
be curious
that.
too. I mean, finding Cattleya Rex online is not very
Well, and then
common.
here's the thing though. Here was the suspicious thing. Like I honestly don't have any guarantee that this is even Cattleya Rex. Hopefully when it blooms it'll be like, yay. But I asked her about, where they came from, and she never got back to me. And I asked her at least twice and never got any information about that. So I have no idea where these came from.
Ah, interesting.
But yeah, this was all of them when they first were deflasked, and so yeah, I've had them for 5 years, and some of the teeny tiny ones did die, but I still have about 20 of them, so I'm pretty happy that my first venture with the seedlings has gone so well. I first started trying to grow them in
Yeah,
these hydro balls, and the roots absolutely hated it. You can see, I don't know if you can see this picture here, but like the the roots just turned brown and ugly, and they didn't seem to like it. So I said, all right, we're gonna try something else. But then I did have a couple of them that were growing in lava rock,
Hmm.
and they loved it. They grew all over that lava rock.
And see, that's key. Like because you hadn't done a whole lot of deflasking before,
Right,
right?
never.
And so you were just observing and making modifications as sort of in real time as things went south.
Right.
Essentially, you were experimenting and trying to figure out what was working for your conditions, and it turned out really well. It's a lot of time. I mean, I remember my first flask. I think everything died. And
Do you remember
um,
what it was?
it, I think it was Cattleya
Oh
cerulean,
wow.
and I just went for it, and I learned a lot, and I've got a flask or a compote here next to me that I can show you once we finish chatting about the Cattleya Rex. But it's you did the right thing in that you were not afraid to experiment. You were watching. You noticed that these root tips were dying in the hydroton balls, and but that the ones in the lava rock were really taking
Oh
off.
yeah, for sure.
And hats off to you. That's those are good observations, and that applies to adult orchids as well.
I left the two in the lava rock for a couple of years, and after a while I noticed that they weren't growing as well for whatever reason. I've heard that lava rock is really good at absorbing salts and minerals, so that could
Yeah.
have been the reason. But eventually I put them all in just regular sphagnum moss, and that's where they stayed for a couple of years. Um,
Yeah, and that's the more common thing that people use to deflask is sphagnum right off the bat. It is it's got a lot of anti-fungal properties to it, and it holds moisture. It's still airy. You get that nice little bit of humidity around the plants and the roots, and the really young plants really appreciate that.
Yeah, I wanted to also show you another experiment was I mounted several of the seedlings. So I had
Yeah.
this hickory tree in our yard that fell over, and I peeled off a lot of the bark, and I stuck several seedlings onto this piece of hickory bark with just some craft glue.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
and the roots grew right through the glue, so it must have been fine for them. But this one that I'm kind of circling here with my mouse, can you see that with my mouse?
Yeah.
And then this one down
Yep.
here have survived to this day. These other ones either they just kind of died or they got repotted. Actually, I think this one got repotted up. So I'm going to show you those, what they look like today, and they've done pretty darn well actually. And then here's another one that got mounted. And today this is
Wow.
my largest one. So I'll kind of use
Okay.
that as
Was that originally your largest one as well, or did that?
no, it was not that big, but it just it just got big. It got
Yeah.
big. Let me see here. So this is actually, let me see here. So let's do a little fast forwarding. This is just kind of some of the different ones of various sizes. These are some of the smallest ones there. Come on. Could have done a better job of organizing my videos, I guess. This was the largest plant that came out of the flask. When you looked at that original flask picture, this was the largest one. And I think it would have done a whole lot
Okay.
better if not for the issue that I've been having, which is every time it tries to put out new roots, they are eaten by snails.
Yeah. The current AOS magazine has a bush snail remedy in the question and answer section, and it was something. I wish I could remember what it was, but it was something that I totally hadn't considered. And oh, it's you get the yellow cards for these little flies, and they're sticky cards, and they attract the little white flies of some sort, and they just stick there. Apparently, the bush snails are also attracted to that, so you can take that and put it on top of your pot, but it's only the yellow card. um, and they'll come up and they'll get stuck in much the same way that these little flies do. So that might be something that you try. It's a fairly simple, cheap remedy, and you know if the AOS is promoting it in the magazine, I don't see why it wouldn't work.
No, for sure. I will definitely be trying everything I can. This is a kind of a
Yeah.
these are these I told you there was one that there were two there was one mount that had two of them that survived. This is that mount a few years later.
Okay.
So these are doing famously. Just
Those
really
roots are
love
great.
that. I do notice that the roots get covered with it looks like maybe algae or something over time, but
Probably.
they lose that beautiful white color pretty soon actually after they grow. But the mounted ones have had zero problems with snails. So, and I've got lots of this bark left, so I'm really thinking uh, that I'm going to mount all the other ones just because it just seems like the
It's
easiest thing
well
to do. Um, I don't know, mounting isn't necessarily easy because then you have to deal with unruly roots going all over the place and getting broken and stuff. But for the most part, the growth on the mounted ones has just been really great.
Yeah, and the mounted ones are can be tricky, especially if you're unable to water frequently. I think that's really why people pot in pots, so you don't have to water every day. But hey, you know, if your mounted ones seem to be doing better for because of bush snails or whatever, and the place where you keep your orchids can provide that moisture on a daily basis. That's how they grow in nature. That's what they're adapted to
Yeah.
do. So it makes sense that they're doing really
This
well.
is that one that was mounted by itself, and it is now my largest one. In the past year in the greenhouse, it has gone crazy. And when this big leaf came out, I thought for sure it would have a sheath on it, and didn't. But then now it's putting out two new growths you can kind of see down here. And I really got my
Yeah,
fingers crossed that one or both of those will put out a sheath and maybe we'll get a flower out of it.
man, that'd be cool if they both put out
If they
spikes this
do, they're
summer.
going to judging. I was
Yeah,
looking on or
look at all those roots.
I
That's
was looking
great.
on Orchids Plus, and there's only three awarded Cattleya Rex in the whole system.
Isn't that mind-boggling? It just wasn't it just wasn't grown that much for a long time, and I think it's becoming more popular now, especially that Cattleya triumphans, which is the primary hybrid between Rex and Doyana, has become so popular. It's it seems to have been Cattleya Doyana's less interesting sibling for whatever reason. Um, and I don't know. My understanding is I've never grown it, but it's less finicky than Doyan. The flowers last longer. It's from the same area, so it's going to require kind of what you found is that the roots want to dry off fairly quickly, and it's odd that it's not grown more widely.
Uh, yeah, that's absolutely right. And I will say
Writing's not
one
that
of the
easy.
I'm actually going to talk now just quickly about the two main sources of information that I got about this particular species because there's not a whole lot of stuff out there. So I'm actually going to drag it over to this screen. Can you see this? So
Yeah,
this has
those are
been
great.
my Bible for Cattleya rex since I got this species 5 years ago. This is an article written by Arthur Chadwick of Chadwick and Son Orchids. They are in Richmond, Virginia. I visited their greenhouses a few years ago, actually, and Arthur Chadwick wrote this incredibly helpful article on not only the culture of Cattleya rex, but also on the history. It's got a fascinating history. Basically, this horticulturalist went out into the Peruvian jungles in the 1800s, loaded up a ship with like 1,000 plants, and when the ship arrived in the harbor in like Liverpool or Blackpool, it sat overnight and all the plants froze. And he came
Yeah,
back and was like, "All right, I'm done." And so it just, it never got the attention that it deserves. Like you say, it's very floriferous. They put out 4 or 5 or more flowers per spike. The flowers are supposed to last a month. They're fragrant. They've got a really great coloration. And this section right here has been I mean, my go-to. It's very simple. It says grow them like
Yeah,
any other large flowered Cattleya species. But I would say the number one thing that I learned about Cattleya rex, having really not grown any other Cattleyas, is that it does not tolerate change. The conditions have to
yeah,
be the same all year round. And if you look at the climate information for the area in Peru where it's from, there's a group of them that grow near Moyobamba, and then there's also another group that grows near Ayacucho. And if you look at the climate data, it's like 26 degrees Celsius high, and uh, 16 to 18 degrees Celsius low every day all year. And
yeah,
that's it. And what I discovered is that anytime my conditions started varying, the plants would suffer.
hmm. Yeah. And I also want to point out for anyone who's looking to grow other labiates or the sort of standard Cattleyas, Arthur Chadwick, that site specifically, he wrote a bunch of articles on all these
Right,
different species, and they're excellently written in that similar format where he starts out with sort of the history of the species and who found what, when, and where, and then he'll talk about where in nature they're found and sort of their natural habitat, and then at the very end he'll go into their culture, and all of that's super interesting and incredibly useful, especially if you've got a new species or one of these more tricky species like Doiana or Rex or some of the other ones. If Arthur wrote about it, I would you should listen
right.
to what he says because he
Yeah,
knows what
and
he's
he's still
talking about.
around, and you could probably call them and ask them.
Yeah, he came to Texas a few years ago and spoke to us, and he was a great speaker, very nice guy. I bought something or the other from some Cattleya from him, and I really want to see him again and buy some more of his
The
stuff.
second place that I found just within the last year, maybe last couple years, was this. On YouTube, there is a Peruvian guy who goes around talking to people about orchids. So the video is in Spanish, but luckily I speak Spanish. So this video has been incredibly helpful. There's a guy in Lima who grows Cattleya rex exclusively. And I'll just show you a
Huh?
little bit of the video on mute here. This
Wow!
whole
Look at that.
this whole nursery is nothing but Cattleya rex. And he talks about, the medium that he uses. He grows them in these plastic pots in 4 centimeters of sphagnum moss. Doesn't use bark. Um, and obviously he's very successful. His plants look amazing. He's got all kinds of different color variations. Um, He talks about light. He says they love lots of light, but he says they also love water. They're very thirsty, Callias. And that's why he grows
Hmm.
them in this sphagnum, so he can keep the roots consistently moist. He says the quality of the water is very important. It's got to be pure water. And he said he waters them like every 4 or 5 days, so he keeps the medium just constantly moist, not soaking wet, but he doesn't really let them dry out. And if you remember, when I grew them in lava rock, I kept the lava rock wet, and they loved it.
Interesting. I'll have to get that link from you
No,
and
for
check that
sure.
out.
Yeah. I've actually contacted this grower and not gotten any response, but he does have a Facebook page and posts pictures of his plants, but he doesn't seem to have updated it anytime recently. But yeah,
Interesting.
he shows
And
here
I
the 4 inch or 4 centimeters of sphagnum that he grows them in, and yeah, he's really successful with it.
Some sometimes when you get a formula like that, if that formula works for your particular conditions, stick with it. As a longtime Cattleya grower, I look at that and I'm like, man, plastic pots with sphagnum for that's tricky. But I've got a friend in Houston who grows his nobilior in sphagnum, and I would never do that. Uh, Mauro Rosam down in Brazil. For those of you who are active on social media, you might know him. He grows a lot of cattleyas, a lot of species, and he uses mostly sphagnum, and he's incredibly successful at it.
I actually talked to Jason Fisher of Orchids Limited when he visited Denver a few months ago, and he said the exact same thing. He visited Taiwan. He saw these enormous cattleyas being grown in big pots full of packed sphagnum, and he was like, it totally changed his thought on growing them. He said cattleyas are thirsty plants.
A lot of folks will try sphagnum and they just sort of put it in very loose. And the interesting thing about sphagnum is the more you jam it in, the quicker it dries out. So it's more like a sponge. So if you take that sponge and you just leave it loose and you add water, it holds a lot of water. But if you take that sponge and you squish it down and then you add water, it's holding a lot less and it dries out quite a bit quicker. And for you Catasetum growers, most of you are probably growing in sphagnum. And when you repot, you got to jam that stuff in there. And I kind of wonder if it's the same thing
If
for
it's tightly
Cattleyas.
packed or
I've never
not.
tried it. Yeah, like I said, I've got this little compote here that I can show you, and I grow them in sphagnum. But as soon as they're beyond that stage, and I'm taking them out, I'm putting them into to small grade Orchiata bark, and maybe I should start playing around with some of the sphagnum, especially here. I grow outside in Texas in summer, and it's
Hmm.
bloody hot.
If you've
You
got
know,
control over your water and you're not getting rain interfering with your own watering schedule, then you might as well try it. But I mean, like I've shown you before,
yeah,
my most successful plants are on mounts right now, you know? And I'd like to
yeah,
attribute that to just the issue that I'm having with the snails in the pots because I think the potted ones would be doing better if that was not such an issue. Um, but yeah, so I love this picture because this is like what I hope with my 25 plants to have one day. It's all of them in bloom at the same time.
that's amazing. Yeah, that looks great. That's definitely a
I would
goal for
certainly
sure.
sacrifice the rest of my collection to just be able to keep those plants, and then obviously when they get big enough, I can start dividing them and sharing them with friends. But for right now, we just want to get them blooming size.
And of course, assuming that
At
they're
all,
Cattleya
yeah, they
Rex,
could
right?
bloom and be all purple
You
and
won't
or
know
something and
until
be like, oh well, that was fun.
yeah.
That was a fun experiment. But yeah, so I'll just go over really quickly. I'll just translate what this guy in Peru says. He says Cattleya rex likes a lot of ventilation and lots of light. I know that's not very specific, but in terms of like foot candles, I think Cattleyas are in the 3 to 5,000 range.
Yeah, 3,000
He
plus.
says they require more frequent watering than other Cattleyas. He
Hmm.
says that you
Okay.
can fertilize them via foliar feeds or also slow release fertilizer. He doesn't give
Okay.
information on the percentages of NPK, but I would assume it's just the balance 10-10-10. I don't know.
Probably if he's just given a general advice, it's probably
Yeah.
something
He says
balanced.
it's really important to be aware of rot, and I definitely have had issues with rot. However, I will say that he says, too much water, you're going to have the first signs of rot if you're watering too much. And I'll add to that and say, if your temperatures are consistent throughout the year, you're going to have less problem with that. Because when I had my plants growing in the sunroom, I don't know if years ago I had everything growing in a sunroom, and in the winter, the high temperature was like 70, 72 degrees Fahrenheit. That's like 20 degrees Celsius. I had rot issues.
Yeah.
The daytime temperature
Okay.
has to be that 26 degree Celsius, in the low 80s, it's got to get up to that point. Your night temperatures can get cool, but your day temperatures have to be good and warm to avoid those rot issues.
I wonder if they get cooler than that, if they go into some kind of a dormancy, and that's typically the time that
Yep.
rot will set in. I wonder if you and this gentleman down in Brazil, Peru, excuse me, are are sort of skipping that dormancy phase by keeping things warm and wet, and so they just keep growing, and then
Well,
there's no rot
exactly. And I
issues.
don't think I don't have evidence to support this except for if you look at climate data from where they're from, there is no winter. And they're so
Yeah.
close to the equator that the quality of light isn't changing that much throughout the year either. So I'm not actually convinced that they would ever really enter that dormancy in nature.
And if you look at that climate data, do you recall rainfall? Because in that part of the world, a lot of time it's not temperature that causes winter. It's a lack of rain, right? So temperature's kind of the same, but suddenly it's dry. Do you know if things get drier in what would be considered winter for that part of
If
the
I
year?
can Google it real quick, I don't know if I'm reading this graph right. Here, I'm gonna show you this graph. Maybe you can see it. On the right side, I think these are millimeters of precipitation.
Yeah.
Um, or is this temperature?
So it looks like temperature is red, and that's sort of that flat line that
Yeah, this is your
that
average
doesn't do much,
temperature,
and then
yeah.
blue. Yeah, and then blue is going to be you're going to go from 18 centimeters in March, I guess, then down to winter time, which is like you said, June, July, August. You're basically cutting that rain in half, but it's still going to be 60 millimeters, which is 6 centimeters, which is probably about this much rain. So that's fairly dry, especially compared to the other wetter time of the year, which most of the year it looks like the rest of the time is twice as much rainfall as the driest month. So yeah, they do have a little dry phase, and that might explain why they are susceptible to rot because in nature during that dry phase they're not going to be growing, I bet, and they're not going to be getting that much water. So they probably kind of shut down, and their metabolism slows down, and like so many of these other orchids that we grow with a distinct dormancy phase, they just become susceptible to rot during that
Well,
time of the
that's
year.
very interesting because I wonder now if the ideal situation for these guys, if they actually need a little bit of a rest.
You know, just because something happens in nature doesn't mean we have to replicate it in cultivation. And I think for the past 5 years, through all your experimenting, and you've shown that these guys do pretty well with consistent conditions all year round.
I love this
I wouldn't change
temperature
it.
because this is exactly, I mean, this is it. This is their yearly
Yeah,
temperature. This is how much tolerance they have for temperature change.
just like 69 to 75, and that's it.
That's
Well, of
the
course that's
average. Yeah, like
average,
I'm
right?
saying, it's like
Average.
a 82-degree day and a 65-degree night in Fahrenheit, and that's
Yeah,
all year round.
that's pretty comfortable.
So what's interesting though also in Peru is that their blooming season is in January in Peru because their winter is opposite our winter, and that looks like it's kind of halfway into the wet season. Like they
Yeah.
start growing as the wet season begins, and then because a lot of them you see them they bloom in the dry season, right?
Hmm. Some
So,
species, yeah.
and I'm assuming that this is all local, like this isn't flipped for our seasons or anything. So yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
So yeah, so here we are. That's
So I bet you get at least one bloom this summer, and you'll know if you have Cattleya rex, and you'll know that you can grow this normally. From what I understand, like I said, I've never grown it, but I understand this is a tricky species, and you're able to take. Was it your first flask? Is this
First
your first
flask
flask?
and first Cattleya.
First flask, first Cattleya, a tricky species no less. This isn't some complex hybrid that's basically bulletproof. You're growing in Kentucky, right?
Right,
And
and I
then now
grew it
you're in
outdoors
Colorado, and
most summers, which may
mhm,
not have been the best thing either
yeah,
because the temperature flux was, I think, too much for them.
yeah, that's interesting. It's a species I kind of want to see if I can grow here in Texas outside, during summer, along with my other Cattleyas. Uh, a lot of these other Cattleyas that I'm growing are just these sort of standard labiates, and you look at their temperature charts, and they're fairly flat, all year round, but they love 105 temperature summers. I'm kind of curious to see if this is one of those species that will just collapse and die on me, or will
So you're
do
gonna
well in
push
the
them.
heat. I always push them. If something's not going to do well in the conditions I can have, they'll die, and I'll make space for something new.
Well, I think that this has been very productive talk, Stephen. I've never looked at that climate graph and considered how the dry season would affect their annual growth, but I can say with confidence temperatures have to be consistent. They just have to. Otherwise, you're going to deal with
Yeah,
problems.
yeah. But before you go, I want to show this little
Oh,
compote
nice.
that I
What
did
are these
here
guys?
a ago. So these were a friend of mine here in town. She crossed. This is Cattleya General Pau, I believe. So I think it's Labiata by Ludemaniana.
That's a, what do you
She
call that, a
crossed
primary
two of her own.
hybrid?
Yeah. This is the primary, two species. And yeah, so you pop them out, kind of what you did. I've got mine in spag.
Oh, that's
This is a
good.
clay pot. You can see all the mold growing around here. It's not sphagnum all the way down. It's really sphagnum, sort of in this top layer. Then below, it's epiweb, or
Styrofoam
you can use
peanuts.
rocks or whatever. Yeah, and so hopefully in 5 years or so, these little guys will look like the ones that you're growing now, your Cattleya Rex, and it's fun. I like it.
I would definitely have had
You know, it
much better luck um, if I had known to keep the temperatures consistent. I don't think it would have taken 5 years uh, to get my first flowers. I think it would have been sooner.
Yeah, it could have been, 3 or 4. I think 5 years is not unreasonable for these guys straight out of flask. They take a long time to bloom.
It's been really also
It's
interesting just to see how nature has been able to, like, how they're able to deal with living up in a tree, never knowing where your next meal is going to come from. Um, yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's taught me more than just like how to grow the plants. It's also like how to live economically, how to take advantage of, the resources that you have. I don't know, I feel like there are life lessons to be learned here.
it's a
At the
lesson in patience
very
at the very least.
least, absolutely. And I used to think snails were cute, and I don't anymore.
Yeah, squish them now.
Oh man. Okay, this has been great. We're at about 46 minutes. I'm going to close this down and maybe cut out some of the parts that we were just not talking or whatever, and then put this up on YouTube later today.